You are listening to Ember Weekend. I'm Chase McCarthy.
And I'm Jonathan Jackson.
And we're going to talk about some Ember newsy things.
Newsy things, yeah. See, I really enjoy talking about newsy things, but I think maybe we're going to diverge a little bit into not so much newsy things, but into practical things today. So I'm a little excited about that, actually.
There's like one practical thing out of all.
There's one practical thing. I mean, it could be practical. I mean,
it might be actually very unpractical.
Very unpractical, indeed. I guess we can get started, but first, let's hear a little word from our sponsor.
Hello, I'm Corey.
And I'm Matt.
Matt and I started our consulting company 201 Created 5 years ago. We've been passionate about Ember and its community since we started and are proud to be able to sponsor Ember Weekend.
Our clients have included Fortune 50 companies and Y Combinator startups. If your team needs Ember training or advice or wants to learn how to make open source work for you, visit us at www.201-created.com or follow us on Twitter at 201 TWO_OH_ONE.
Thanks for listening and enjoy the podcast.
All right, so the first thing we're going to mention is a thing that just got dropped into the announcements channel today, actually. We're recording on Saturday, the weekend, right? Anyone? Is that the name of the thing? Anyways, it's by Derek Wickern, and it's basically a little add-on that you can drop into your application, and it will prettify, ostensibly, your Chrome formatter. So instead of seeing like an object with a bunch of Ember properties on it that you may or may not have to use the .get to actually see the value of, it'll actually annotate all that stuff. It looks really pretty. I haven't actually gotten a chance to check it out, but the screenshots make it look really interesting. It's something that I'm probably going to pull into Ember Weekend, but I really want to test it out and see. I have some concerns or questions about performance, because it likely has to do a lot of introspection to get that information to format it properly. So it's gonna be interesting to check out. I'm really excited about it though. It looks really pretty, and I think there's already in the thread on the announcements channel. There's already some talk about bringing this over to the Ember Inspector, which seems pretty cool.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about this is that even if there is a little bit of a performance issue, which I probably wouldn't be because it's a formatter, this doesn't happen in production. Right. It doesn't get compiled in, so you don't have to worry about it affecting your production builds.
Right, which is, obviously, I think that's super cool that the build pipeline really does facilitate a lot of cool things that you can have as, developer ergonomic only tools. So that's pretty neat. But I definitely encourage you guys to check it out. Let us know what you think in your projects and see if it helps. I'm really excited to give it a whirl myself. I didn't really know that custom formatters were actually an option. So this is kind of opening my eyes to investigate, other formatters and things. So it's really cool. Definitely good work. Check it out and let us know what you think.
All right, and the next thing we're going to talk about is a couple changes that happened in the 2.13 release, and it's been a while, like April or something that this was released, but I just kind of became aware of them because I'm doing an upgrade to 2.13 on an app that's much further back. And one of them is changes to factory 4. So if you've used _lookup factory from the container, what this is for is if you want to get a constructor to create something rather than go get a singleton or the one thing that exists or something. This is what Ember Data uses under the hood to create an instance of something. And apparently this used to do something really interesting. It used to actually have to first do an extend of that class to add things like injections and various other things, come up with a subclass, and then call create on that. But that meant that there was a subclass that was being created every single time you did factory 4. And if you were doing this in a big loop or something, it was doing it over and over and over again. And what they're doing now is they add on those properties in the create rather than doing an extra subclass. So it makes it much more performant.
Yeah, which is really cool. So I recently did the upgrade to 2.13 on my client project. And there's definitely performance implications. Factory 4 is used a lot, which I think is cool. And I can't remember exactly when this was, but I'm pretty sure we had talked about this. This was actually discussed in an RFC a long time ago. And I could have swore we mentioned it on Ember Weekend, but Chase and I both did a search of the RSS feed to see if we had mentioned it, and we couldn't find it. So it's good to see that this finally made its way in. I definitely think that it's, obviously it's a performance win, which is really cool. I did notice that there was an add-on or two when I did the upgrade that actually relies on that subclass to exist for certain reasons. And you have to be aware that that was happening. And, it's a little bit difficult to diagnose. So it's one of those things where just, take a look and maybe read the RFC. We'll link to that as well. so you can be prepared if you are starting the Ember 2.13 upgrade and you notice some weird things. And the other thing that happened in the 2.13, 2.14 release, which there's a nice blog post that we'll link to, is that the private routing service has been deprecated. There's some information there about how to address those deprecations. I think most people aren't using like the recognizer and things like that, so it's probably not going to be too painful. I don't think I ran into any instances where we were using some of those deprecated APIs in my client app at the moment. But and I think, Chase, you were talking earlier in 2.15, behind a feature flag is the new routing service. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's mentioned in the blog post about this that 2.15, which is Canary right now, has the actual implementation of this. And so basically, once you get to 2.15, or once 2.15 is released or in beta and you're using it, you need to remove this polyfill and use that implementation.
Right. Yeah. So the Ember router service polyfill, which I think that was released
like 6 days ago or something.
Yeah, it was not that long ago. It was very recent. But yeah, I think this is addressing a lot of concerns. I know we had talked. This is actually really a weird thing that I remember. I don't know why. But remember when we did the Ember 2 training in Chicago with Eric Brin? Like, it had to have been like 2 years ago now. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, he was the one who told me about the routing service then.
Oh, yeah. And there's been like 3 different implementations of
Yeah.
the routing polyfill, like kind of like that. It's same exact interface, like at least the inject Ember, service, right? That part of it looks exactly the same. You end up getting the router just like it exists when you do get owner lookup and then, router : main or whatever. You get the exact same thing. So they have pretty similar interfaces.
Yeah, which is cool. I think this is finally at a point where, everything's been aligned and it's gonna be really nice to finally have like a really finalized, solid interface to deal with the router. I know, I think you and I have been using it on and off in components for a while, but it's nice to have this be part of like an official kind of thing.
One of the things I think every app that I've been on ends up using this for is having like a nav bar that needs to like know what route is currently active, where maybe those aren't the actual links. Like, so Link 2 has some special tie-ins with the routing service, the internal one, so that it can get like an active state. But if you want to like do that in a different way, you end up needing this. Or there's various other things like we have a flash message service in one of the apps I work on where it needs to clear flash messages after a transition. So there's certain times when you need to get a hold of that transition happening and subscribe to it or whatever. And this RFC that introduced this has a lot of other side effects about like components now have flags that say, hey, I use the routing service, and so I need to basically re-render if routes change and things like that. So that's why this wasn't something, even though we did hear about this years ago and people have implemented polyfills, it's why it hasn't been implemented till now, because it touches like everything.
Yeah, and I think that they were accessing the internal router in kind of weird ways with the previous implementation. And now I think the router service is like the router that you're actually getting the actual router. I think this polyfill doesn't necessarily do that, but it emulates it such that, in like 2.15 or whenever, it should just be like, go away, and now you're actually using the real router, which is really cool. So like the idea that you're actually interacting with the router, not like, some internal tool to like interface with, you know what I mean? Like having all of that stuff consolidated seems like a really big win.
Yeah, because there's like a mini lib or whatever they call it, a router library that's kind of external to Ember. It was always weird because you always said like router.router, and that second router is private, but there's no underscore in front of it, and it was actually not the same thing. And so now they actually renamed it in a way that's much more recognizable, that one, that's a private API, and two, it's not. It's like an external library. Like they've actually called it like underscore router mini lib or something like that.
Microlib,
yeah.
Minilib? Yeah.
Even smaller than a mini lib.
Yeah, it's totally micro. So anyways, check this stuff out. There's a really good blog post, the 2.13, 2.14 blog post, and we'll link to the RFC for the router service. Check it out. So the next thing we're going to talk about is a follow-up to, I want to say last week's post by Chad Hietala and Sarah Clatterbuck. It's basically about more details on the actual like Glimmer VM. And a couple of things I need to mention, like right off the bat, is that this is technical. I had to read this like 2 times, and I'm still going to have to read it more to like actually understand it. But it's interesting. I think some of the like high level things that Chase and I were able to kind of take away is that basically it's pull based, so it means that there's no observers and there's no subscriptions to keep the values updated. which is really interesting. And then a lot of the other information was around like the wire format and some of the processes to like turn the wire format back into something that can be executed by the VM. It's intensely in-depth, so definitely set aside some time to read it, but it's very, very interesting. You're going to find out a lot of things about Glimmer and about, the potential for like performance and all that sort of thing. So I would definitely recommend checking it out.
Yeah, I mean, it goes into a lot of the implementation details that are, it's a high level. It's all kind of pseudocode in TypeScript, but it's interesting. It doesn't really explain why a lot of them are wins, like why they're more performant, but it definitely shows like when you see the wire format, you're like, what is this even doing and how does this get processed? And it goes into like, how that happens. Doesn't really say why that is more performant, it seems like, but I think that discussion would be even more technical.
Yeah, and I think kind of seems like this would pair really nicely. Like if you're really interested in the Glimmer VM with, I think Gavin Joyce gave the talk at EmberConf about the animated guide to the Glimmer VM.
Oh yeah,
which was really, really excellent. So I think maybe combining the two would be really good, just to kind of like try to round out your understanding of Glimmer, especially when people ask you like, "Hey, what's Glimmer? What is this?" And you're like, "Well, it's this thing that like you want to be able to kind of talk a little bit more in depth about it." So, and it's definitely interesting. Well, I see where the excitement is coming from.
Yeah, I'd like to see one of Gavin's animations, like the ones he spent like all that time preparing for the conference. They're really good. I want to see, because I'm a visual thinker, and so that really helped me. And I want to see that, but I want to see like a comparison between kind of the HTML bars approach with like observers and like, hey, here's how much work you would have to do this very simple thing. Here's like the work going on. And then now let's do it in Glimmer and see, now it's all pull based and everything's, FRP. I don't really know what that means. I want to see that comparison and show like, here's why it's more performant. There's this many less computations happening, or, there's not any observers. So there's nothing like periodically kind of firing like a tick and saying, hey, has this thing changed? Has this thing changed? But instead is saying like, this thing got rendered and that observes it. And so here, and then, it re-renders. And then this is, it goes in this post, everything's like geared off of set. Like when you call set on an object, that's how it knows like, hey, this object's ticket, I think they call it, it got dirtied. And now this part of the page has to re-render. It'd be interesting to see a side-by-side animation comparison of them. So.
Right. Yeah, that would be cool. Although honestly, like with as much work as Gavin put into that talk, I imagine that's not likely to happen.
Right? Yeah. I know. Yeah. It's like, I want to see it, but I don't want to make it. Like I can't make it.
Yeah.
But it's a good learning experience. If somebody wants to do it to like teach themselves,
and you, of course,
and then send it to me.
And you reap the benefits,
right?
Of course. So so check out this blog post. Like I said, set aside some time to read it because you'll probably want to read it a couple times. Thanks to Chad and Sarah for posting it. It's pretty cool.
And the last thing we're going to talk about is everybody's favorite topic, CSS. So there's a bunch of libraries coming out. I think, Component CSS has been out for a while. Recently, somebody told me about Post CSS and how now there's an Ember CLI Post CSS. And then I've also just learned about Ember CSS-modules, which they all seem to like, all of the Ember libraries specifically, seem to do with trying to like modularize and like isolate components and have them not kind of interfere with the rest of the page and have, when you render something, you want to be somewhat sure that it's going to render a certain way, no matter where it's rendered on the page. With flexibility. So it's a very complicated problem, and it's something that, CSS has been around for a long time. It solves these problems, but it does it in a very different way from JavaScript. And the one I want to specifically mention and talk about is Ember CSS modules, because I really like the way that it's kind of transparent to you. You kind of get to pretend that CSS just works in a more isolated way with less of the cascade. And it basically does this by when you attach a class to a component, and I'm just kind of giving a high-level overview because I haven't actually dug down into the internals of how this works. If you give a component a class like foo, it will append that with a random number, and then also in the CSS, it does some post-processing to match up that random number, and then now that component has a specific class in there that will not interfere with other classes, and it isolates the component. It's I don't know, John, you've used this before. What's been your experience with it?
So on my current client project, they use it, and it seems pretty great. The isolation isn't difficult to really wrap your head around. I think you and I were kind of going around in circles about whether or not you could theoretically hit a class limit because it does append a random string to the CSS classes. Which how many would that need to be, Chase? I don't know if we actually looked at it.
It was like 64K. It used to be something like 4K back in the day, like IE 8 times. But I guess it's been recently updated to like 64K. And that's not really have classes. It seemed like it was like rules. You could have that many rules.
Yeah. Well, it seems interesting. I'm not 100% certain if we'd ever. I have not seen anyone bump into that, but it seems like that is definitely a concern. I'm sure somebody has. I mean, you could probably optimize it to where you only include the classes that actually matter. But yeah, it's been really great. And I'm not exactly a CSS person, so maybe I'm not the best person to see with this. But it has a lot of configuration options that I really appreciate. Modifying the pipeline is pretty simple, and there's a ton of different ways that you can configure the post CSS stuff, including like you can just add post CSS. I think they're called plugins. I think. Yeah, and you can just drop those in, and they just kind of work. So it's very friendly. It's nice, and it does offer, especially if you use it with a pod syntax or a pod directory structure. You end up saying like, oh, I have a component, and a component is named this, and it has its own CSS field, and it's very intuitive. You open up the file, you open up the folder, and you have a list of all the files that are relevant, including styles, which is really nice. So it's kind of like Shadow DOM, but not Wait,
is it Shadow DOM or Virtual DOM?
It's Shadow DOM.
Yeah. So the thing I really liked about it was what you mentioned. It supports post CSS plugins, and the reason why I like post CSS is that you write your plugins in JavaScript, not in like CSS or Sass or some. You don't write it in some weird like CSS-like language that's also has logic. You write it in a language like that you use every day for programming. So it seems like it's much easier to test these things. The logic's much more sound. So I really like the idea of post CSS, and the idea that this works with post CSS makes it very attractive, and it looks super clean.
Yeah, and like I said, I haven't had any problems with it. There's some. I want to say we forked off of it on my current project to do something different with the way sprites are handled, but it's not so difficult to modify, and it's actively maintained. So I think in general, it's definitely something that I would consider if you're looking for a better CSS kind of experience and with like more isolation.
All right, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have any comments or anything, you want to reach out to us, you can find us on Twitter at Ember Weekend. Make sure to check out the website. It's ember-weekend.com, and we have a blog, and that's at ember-weekend.com/blog. You can also subscribe to the feed. That's in iTunes now, so I don't even have to tell you the feed URL because you can just search for it there.
It's the first time in like 105 episods that we didn't.
Yeah, that I don't actually have to say the whole like feed.xml.
Yeah, ember-weekend.com/feed.xml.
Yeah. Right, like you're going to type that in somewhere.
Well, people did.
We had to. That was the only option.
Yeah. But yeah, I also want to mention that our show is edited by Joel North, and we're sponsored by 201 Created.
All right, I'm Chase McCarthy.
And I'm Jonathan Jackson.
And we'll talk to you next week.